Governments never have the money to pay for wars. Not Rome, not Britain, not the United States, not any empire in the recorded history of organized conflict. Wars cost more than any tax system can generate in real time. They require resources on a scale that exceeds what any government can honestly extract from its population without triggering revolt. Every major military conflict in modern history has been financed not through genuine fiscal capacity, but through mechanisms designed to obscure who is actually paying the bill. The media debates whether a war is justified, whether the cause is righteous, whether the strategy is sound. Nobody asks the question that matters most to the people watching from home. Who is actually paying for this? The answer is not the defense contractors. They're being paid. The answer is not the bond investors. They're being paid. The answer is not the politicians authorizing the spending. They are certainly not paying. The bill lands, as it always has, on the purchasing power of ordinary people, not through a line item on their tax return, not through a visible deduction from their paycheck, through the slow, persistent, mathematically inevitable erosion of what their money actually buys. The inflation destroying your purchasing power at the grocery store today is not an accident. It is not a supply chain problem. It is not the residue of a pandemic. It is the war tax, hidden in plain sight. Extracted from every dollar you hold, every wage you earn, every dollar you save, the empire is not going broke. It is quietly bankrupting the middle class to keep the machine running. The illusion of the budget. The ancient version of this mechanism was crude enough that ordinary people could recognize it immediately. Roman emperors who needed to fund military campaigns simply debased the coinage. They melted down silver coins, mixed in cheaper metals, and minted more coins from the same quantity of silver. More coins, less value per coin. Prices rose to compensate. The Roman public understood what was happening, not because they had advanced economics training, but because the coins felt different. They looked different. The silver sheen was visibly absent. Spanish monarchs funding their colonial wars extracted silver from the Americas and flooded European markets, producing the price revolution of the 16th century, a sustained inflationary episode driven by monetary expansion that impoverished wage earners across the continent while enriching those who received the new silver first. The mechanism was visible. The public could trace the connection between the money they handled and the purchasing power they were losing. Modern war finance is the same mechanism, redesigned to be invisible. The state does not announce a war tax. That would cause a revolt. It does not raise income tax rates to fund missile programs. That would end political careers. Instead, it uses the central bank. The government issues treasury bonds, debt instruments promising future repayment with interest. The central bank purchases those bonds, creating new currency in the process. The defense contractors, weapons manufacturers, and logistics companies receive that freshly created currency as payment for their goods and services. The money is real, the contracts are fulfilled, the military apparatus is funded, and the cost, the genuine resource cost of transferring labor, materials, and productive capacity from civilian to military use, is distributed across the entire population through the inflation that monetary expansion eventually produces. The sophistication of the system is not in hiding the cost. It is in obscuring the mechanism connecting the military spending to the grocery bill, in stretching the transmission lag between the monetary creation and the price impact long enough that most people never make the connection. By the time the inflation lands in your shopping cart, the war that caused it has been forgotten, justified, or replaced by the next one. Stage 1. The printing press as a weapon. In 2001, the United States government was running a budget surplus. By 2009, it was running the largest peacetime deficit in its history to that point. The intervening years produced 2 wars, multiple military campaigns, a homeland security apparatus built from scratch, and a financial crisis response that added trillions more to the debt. The combined cost of the post-September 11th military commitments alone, across Iraq, Afghanistan, and associated operations, is estimated by the Costs of War Project at Brown University to exceed $8 trillion when long-term veterans care, interest on war debt, and associated security spending are included. $8 trillion from a government that was running a surplus when the decade began. This money did not come from taxation. American tax revenues did not increase by $8 trillion over that period. The gap was financed through debt issuance, treasury bonds purchased by investors, foreign governments, and increasingly by the Federal Reserve itself. This is the Cantillon Effect in its modern form. Richard Cantillon, an 18th century Irish-French economist, observed that newly created money does not enter an economy uniformly. It enters at specific points, in the hands of those who receive it first, and spreads outward from there, raising prices as it moves through successive transactions. The defense contractor who receives the first payment from newly created government currency benefits at yesterday's prices. Their employees benefit at slightly higher prices. The suppliers benefit at higher prices still. By the time the monetary expansion has worked its way through the economy into general price levels, the ordinary consumer is paying the fully adjusted prices while their wages have not yet caught up. The insider gets rich first. The middle class absorbs the cost last. This is not a side effect of war finance. It is the structural consequence of funding military expenditure through monetary expansion rather than explicit taxation. And it has operated the same way across every major military power that has used this mechanism, which is to say, across every major military power in modern history. Stage 2. the inflation boomerang. Here's the mechanism that connects military spending to your monthly budget. When the government issues debt to fund a military operation, and the central bank purchases that debt through asset purchases, new currency enters the financial system. Initially, that currency circulates primarily within financial markets, in treasury markets and bank reserves in the interbank lending system. But currency does not stay in financial markets indefinitely. It migrates into the real economy through bank lending, through government spending on wages and contracts, through the secondary effects of military production on supply chains and employment. When that currency reaches the real economy, when it begins competing for the same goods and services that existing currency was already chasing, prices adjust upward. The adjustment is not uniform. Energy prices respond quickly because energy is globally traded and immediately sensitive to monetary conditions. Food prices follow because agricultural commodities are similarly globally priced. Housing costs respond as excess liquidity seeks hard assets. Consumer goods respond more slowly because retail pricing is stickier and supply chains can partially absorb cost increases before passing them to consumers. By the time the full inflationary impact is visible in consumer price statistics, the monetary expansion that caused it may be years in the past. Consider the specific mathematics of what this means for an ordinary household. If your salary grows at 3% annually, and consumer prices grow at 6% annually for 5 consecutive years, you have not received a pay cut. Your nominal income has increased, but your real purchasing power has declined by approximately 15% over that period. You're working the same hours, you're producing the same output, but the real value of what you receive in exchange has been quietly extracted and redistributed to the entities that received the newly created currency before prices adjusted. This is not economic theory. This is the documented experience of American, British, and Australian middle-class households across every period of sustained military expenditure, financed through deficit spending and monetary expansion. The inflation destroying your purchasing power is not an isolated economic event. It is the fiscal consequence of military spending being hidden from your tax bill and embedded in your grocery bill instead. The war tax was always paid. It was simply collected in a way designed to prevent you from recognizing the collector. Stage 3. The endless cycle. Here's the structural trap that makes the situation more than just expensive. It makes it self-perpetuating. Once a nation has financed sustained military expenditure through debt and monetary expansion, the debt does not disappear when the conflict ends. It remains on the sovereign balance sheet, accumulating interest, requiring refinancing, growing as a percentage of GDP whenever economic growth slows. The United States government's interest payments on its national debt exceeded $1 trillion annually for the first time in 2024. That is, money transferred from taxpayers to bondholders, to the institutional investors, foreign central banks, and domestic financial institutions that hold Treasury securities, without producing a single road, hospital, or school. The interest cost of past wars is embedded in the current fiscal position of every country that financed those wars through debt. And here's the trap that the people who manage the system understand clearly and almost never explain publicly. If the central bank stops accommodating government debt through monetary expansion, if it allows interest rates to rise to levels that genuinely reflect the risk of the debt load, the cost of servicing the existing debt becomes fiscally catastrophic. Governments would be forced into austerity programs that would be politically unsustainable. Debt crises would emerge in the bond markets. The financial system would face significant instability. If the central bank continues accommodating the debt load, maintaining loose monetary conditions, accepting elevated inflation as the price of stability, the currency continues its slow erosion. Purchasing power continues declining. The extraction from ordinary savers and wage earners continues. There is no painless exit from a debt supercycle. The question is not whether the cost will be paid. The question is who pays it. The institutional investors who hold Treasury securities and real assets denominated in hard commodities are positioned to preserve real value through the adjustment. Their portfolios contain inflation hedges, real assets, equities with pricing power. The erosion of currency purchasing power is a headwind they can navigate. The household with its savings in a bank account, its income is a fixed salary, its wealth primarily in dollars, that household has no structural hedge. Every percentage point of inflation above wage growth is a direct transfer of real wealth from that household to the entities that receive the monetary expansion first. The elites are not unaware of this dynamic. The documented behavior of sovereign wealth funds, institutional family offices, and high net worth investors across every period of sustained monetary expansion shows the same pattern. Reduction of cash holdings, accumulation of real assets, gold, productive land, equities with hard asset backing, anything whose value is anchored to physical reality rather than monetary policy. They are not staying in the burning building and hoping for the best. They are walking out through the exit that most people do not know exists. Peace does not reset the financial damage of war finance. When the guns stop, the debt remains. The interest compounds. The inflation that funded the conflict is embedded in price levels that do not reverse when the military campaign ends. The purchasing power extracted from ordinary savers during the conflict is not returned when peace is declared. The financial extraction of war is permanent. The monetary expansion that funded it does not unwind. The debt it produced does not disappear. The inflation it caused does not reverse. Governments have understood this dynamic since Rome discovered that debasing the coinage was easier than raising taxes. The mechanism has been modernized, abstracted, and embedded in the language of monetary policy and fiscal management. But the underlying logic has not changed. The state needs resources for military spending beyond what explicit taxation can provide. It accesses those resources through mechanisms that obscure the true cost from the people paying it. Those people absorb the cost through inflation, through the slow erosion of purchasing power, through the widening gap between what they earn and what things cost. You cannot vote your way out of a structural financial extraction. The mechanism operates below the level of electoral politics. It runs through central bank balance sheets and bond market dynamics and the long transmission lag between monetary creation and consumer price adjustment. What you can do is understand it, recognize it when it is operating, and position your financial life outside the maximum blast radius of its consequences. The system relies on your ignorance to fund its wars. Wealth history. Vision is here to make sure they don't get it. Subscribe and stay awake in a sleeping world.